So I'm very happy to announce our speaker, who's Sherry Kirkvold, who will be speaking about return of the humpback whales. Sherry brings a deep love of nature, along with more than 30 years experience as a naturalist, geographer, and expedition leader. She has worked in the national, provincial, and regional park systems, as well as in museums, colleges, and for ecotourism companies. And the title of her talk today is The Return of the Humpback Whales. So I will pass it over to you, Sherry. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much, Stephanie. I hope that you can hear me okay. My voice is a little under the weather here, but I'll do my best. So my love affair with whales began in the late 70s. I was on top of Radar Hill at Pacific Rim National Park with a little whale watching brochure. And lo and behold, and that's back in the days when there was a view from Radar Hill, which there's not anymore. But we saw a series of blows and a tail fluke, just like it said in the brochure. And even though I'm way up on the hill and not close like this, it was so exciting. I was jumping up and down. And then in the 80s, I got a job as a naturalist in that park. And here I am in the kayak I had newly built, and I had a much closer encounter with a gray whale. And rather than be afraid, you can see that I'm reaching out my hand. So I felt something at that moment. And in the 90s, I worked with a whale researcher in the Bay of Fundy with North Atlantic right whales. And this was a more invasive style of research where we'd use a crossbow to shoot a tag into the whale's blubber. And then we'd follow it around for a couple of days with a radio antenna, catching the signal only when the whale surfaced. And then the tag would release and we'd get all kinds of data. We'd have heart rate, time and depth of dives. But of particular interest was the acoustic data we collected, and that contributed to moving the shipping lanes to benefit the whales. And also in the 90s, I began working with Maple Leaf Adventures as a naturalist on their ecotourism vessels. And at that time, usually if we were looking for whales, we'd be looking for killer whales. And then I also started working with Blue Water Adventures in the 2000s. When I first started working on the coast, you would rarely see humpback whales unless you were going to Alaska. And in more recent years, we've begun seeing more and more, including an occasional friendly whale, such as this one. Other whales we'd see from time to time include minke whales, and in this case, a skeleton that was washed up on the beach. And the most recent whales to be seen more frequently are the fin whales. They're the second largest of the whales after the blue whale, and they're so fast they're known as the greyhounds of the sea. But tonight, I'm going to talk mostly about humpback whales, and we'll look at some of their behaviors, why their populations are recovering, some new research taking place, and some citizen science. So it's always exciting when you happen upon whales, and there's really not anything I love more than spending time with them. And to understand why there are more humpbacks now than in recent years, we need to know a little bit about whaling on the coast. And while there was indigenous whaling in a few areas, the scale of it didn't affect whale populations. Several whaling stations operated between, I think it was about 1907 and 1967, roughly. These are the remains of the station at Rose Harbor on Haida Gwaii. And it's estimated prior to whaling that there had been about 20,000 humpback whales in the North Pacific. When the last whaling station closed in 1967, and that's not all that long ago, there were between 1,200 and 1,400 humpbacks left. So from 20,000 to maybe 1,400. Many other whale species were hunted in that time: fin, sperm, say, blue whales. North Pacific right whales had already been wiped out by the time the BC stations even opened. So the return of the humpback whales is one of our good news stories, with the population rebounding almost to historic numbers. So it's estimated that now there's about 18,000 humpbacks in the North Pacific. And in the Great Bear Sea, the area I'll be mostly talking about, whale researchers counted 40 whales in their area when they first started their research, and that was about 2001. And now that population is about 500 whales. So in this graphic, showing the BC whaling station, so there's wherever there's a little pie there, that's related to one of the BC stations. But if you look at the graph on the bottom, you'll see all the red over on the left-hand side. That's the humpback whales. And they were hit really hard early on. And basically, once they were wiped out, then they started taking the other whale species. And, today we can look back and just wonder how we thought it was okay to decimate these magnificent sentient beings. And I also can't help but think that here in BC, many think it's still okay to cut down 1,000-year-old giant trees in ancient forests. And perhaps one day we'll look back on that in the same way. So the return of the whales has provided lots of opportunities for both researchers and citizen scientists, as well as a wonderful tourism opportunity when carried out following whale watching regulations and being considerate of whales. So you can't approach within 100 meters of humpback whales, and the rules for killer whales vary from 200 to 400 meters. So how big is humpback whale? Well, here's a group of people standing in front of a life-size illustration in Iceland. So think bus-sized, about 40 to 50 feet, 12 to 16 meters, and weighed around 25, 30 tons and more. And here's a life-size model of a tail fluke, and it's about 15 feet wide, 5 meters, and we'll talk about the patterning in a little bit later. So most often it's a blow that indicates their presence, and that misty plume can rise about 20 feet, 7 meters above, so it makes it visible for a long distance away. And this one I call a rain blow. And not only might you see a blow, but sometimes it's the sound of it that alerts you to the presence of whales. So I've got a little video here. I encourage you to turn your sound up for these. So the blows from different whale species can have some different characteristics. And this photo shows the heart shape of a blow just emerging. And that's because humpback whales have two nostrils. And that's one of the differences between baleen and toothed whales, because the toothed whales just have a single blowhole. Another common thing to see is the back of the whale as it surfaces to breathe. And the humpback takes its name from the hump shape on their dorsal fin as it makes a dive into the water. And these dorsal fins can come in a variety of shapes and colors, and this one's a little more distinctive than most. We'll talk about tail identification later, but we should note that there are also catalogs with dorsal fin IDs, which is great as they're much easier to see than the underside of a tail. So after several breaths at the surface, the humpback will take a deeper feeding dive. And while it's always exciting to see a tail disappearing below the surface, it usually means that the whale will remain underwater for quite some time. In some cases, when the whale is feeding at a certain depth, you can predict when it will surface. And it makes you look really good as a naturalist when you can look at your watch and say, oh, okay, it should surface about now, and then poof. It's not always the case, but sometimes you get lucky. So 4 to 10 minutes is a common range for a whale to stay down, although they can stay down for 30 minutes. When a whale lifts its head out of the water, we call it a spy hop, and it's able to take a look above the water and see around. So looking closely at this one, we can see some fist-sized bumps called tubercles that are hair follicles with tiny hairs called vibrissae. And of course, all mammals have hair. And it's thought that these might help the whale feel different vibrations in the water column. It's like an extra sense to help them build a finer picture of their surrounding environment. And if you have a bigger screen, look closely and you might be able to see the tiny pink whale lice. And here you can see whale barnacles. So the round white circles are barnacle scars, and the hard white barnacles, called humpback whale barnacles, live only on humpback whales. Now, I once collected a couple of these from a dead whale, and let me tell you, they were very hard to dig out. Now, there's also a second barnacle, a gooseneck variety, the ones with the long pink necks, and they're called rabbit ear goosenecks, and they live on top of the other barnacles. Now, I mentioned earlier there are different types of whales, the major groups being the baleen whales and the toothed whales. So here you can see the baleen, which sits in rows in the whale mouth, and it's made of keratin, just like our fingernails. So water's taken in while eating, and then forced out through the baleen plates, which capture the food, whether it be krill or small schooling fish. And since these whales don't have teeth, it's hard to determine their exact age, but scientists believe that they live about 80 to 90 years. Humpback whales are the only whales that have the big, long pectoral fins. These can be about 15 feet or 5 meters long, or about a third of the whale's body length. The scientific name, Megaptera, means large winged and refers to these long wing-like pectorals. It's believed that these long fins help them spin underwater, such as when they're making bubble nets. And some modern day wind turbines are being designed with the same wavy edges as these fins. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the research taking place on the West Coast. When whale research started on our coast, there were not many humpbacks, so it mostly focused on killer whales. And funded by government, photo identification of killer whale dorsal fins and saddle patches helped us learn about their various populations. One of the early independent research stations, Orca Lab on Hansen Island, was started in 1970 by Dr. Paul Spong. And his goal was to study whales in a non-invasive way by observing them and listening to them on fixed hydrophones. Now, from the outside, it looks like a small shack, but it's filled with sophisticated equipment. And it varies year by year, but they also operate a video monitoring station on Craycroft Island, as well as some fixed hydrophones. And when operational, you can log on via your computer to listen to and watch for the whales. And there's also archived files of some of the best footage. A little later, we'll listen to something that I recorded from here at home. Then Janie Ray and Herman Mutter, who worked at Orca Lab, opened Cetacea Lab up in the Great Bear Rainforest on Gill Island in 2001. And they started with the idea of researching killer whales, but found they had arrived just as the humpback population was starting to rebound. And that became a major component of their study. And then fin whales started to return as well. And they follow the same philosophy of non-invasive research. Then in 2017, Janie Ray opened another station on Finn Island in the Great Bear Rainforest. And with the possibilities of first oil tankers and now LNG tankers, this station is well positioned to do a baseline study of whales who could end up living on a tanker route. So this is what it looked like when it was first built, and now it's had a little bit more added to it. It's taken a few years to properly equip the station, but much of what I have to say does come from the work here. So one of the newest methods of research is the sampling of whale breath using drones to fly through it. And this, of course, is done with proper permits. So a few years ago, I was visiting the gray whale lagoons in Baja, Mexico, and happened upon the Snotbot team. So of course, I went right over to chat and learned they were flying Petri dishes mounted on drones through whale breath to collect some of the exhaled snot. And this blow contains a treasure trove of valuable biological information: DNA, stress and pregnancy hormones, microbiomes, and potentially other indicators of the animal's health and ecology. So this same type of study is taking place at Finn Island. So this is Aideen O'Mahony. She's an Irish intern studying at the University of Glasgow, who's the drone pilot, and she also analyzes what she's collected. And the information can be used in many ways to learn more about how individual whales are related to each other, especially if you can get a tail ID taken of a whale whose snot's collected. Because we know a lot about mother and calf relationships, but we know almost nothing about fathers. And this research is less invasive than other sampling methods, which can include shooting a dart into a whale's blubber to get a skin biopsy. As well, the overhead drone imagery allows researchers to calculate the size of each individual, both in length and width. It'll help assess how well they're feeding, interaction between members of the group, and estimation of their pregnancy rates. So even newer is the collection of water samples to collect environmental DNA, or eDNA. And this comes from the material shed by organisms. It can be sampled using new molecular methods. So researchers collect water from the fluke print area where a whale has just dived. And this type of research is now being conducted in the Salish Sea on killer whales by Dr. Chloe Robinson and Gary Sutton. And no doubt we'll see wider applications in future for other kinds of whales. And I think that this also holds a lot of promise for citizen scientists to someday collect water samples for analysis. Because as well as learning about whales, we could learn, for example, about the state of salmon populations along the coast. So let's talk about some of their behaviors. At Finn Island, they observe whales both from land and from small boats. And these behaviors are documented to learn more about these animals. So in coastal waters, it's not uncommon to see a large whale erupt from the water and return with a huge splash. And this is called breaching. And sometimes they completely clear the surface of the water. We don't really know why they do this. It might be to lose parasites, to communicate with a big splash, or maybe it's even just for fun. I kind of think that communication plays some kind of a role in this behavior, and we'll come to that in a bit. So sometimes there will be a single breach, and sometimes the whale will breach many times in succession. One of the whales I saw in Iceland, its name was 60 jumps, and I'm guessing that it was counted breaching that many times. And I've witnessed whales breaching continuously for about an hour. So I'm going to take the sound off of this video because it's just wind on the microphone. Another behavior believed to be a method of communication is slapping one or both of their pectoral fins on the surface of the water. This usually happens multiple times, sometimes using one fin, sometimes using both together or one at a time. And here you can see two whales not far apart. One is peck slapping and the other is tail slapping. And I'll just show you a little video of these two whales. So hopefully, as we continue to study these whales, we'll learn more about what it is they're actually communicating. So let's look at some of the feeding strategies. So why do humpback whales come to this area? Well, there's a lot of food in these colder waters. And in order to make enough blubber to sustain them throughout the winter migrations, humpback whales eat huge amounts of food each day. And it's not uncommon to see other marine mammals feeding on the same food. So here we see a humpback whale, a Steller's sea lion, Pacific white-sided dolphin, some gulls, and then of course the rainbow is a bonus. Here with some sea lions, with dolphins and birds, and another dolphin. So how do they go about feeding? Well, there are several different strategies which depend on what they're eating, and there are two major types of food, are small schooling fish and krill. So if the krill is highly concentrated, they might just basically swim through it and gulp their way through the food. And basically they open their mouths wide and just swim through it. So their mouths are like, they become a gigantic scoop and they take in a huge amount of water and any prey that it contains. And the throat grooves or pleats expand to make a bigger capture area. A humpback can contain about 5,000 gallons of water in its mouth. So that's enough to fill a 12-foot by 10-foot swimming pool to a depth of 7 feet, or 4 by 3 meters, 2 meters deep. Now, think about the weight of all that water in the mouth as it breaks the surface. The water is then pushed out through the baleen, and the tongue sort of licks it off, and the food is swallowed. So sometimes a tail will be tossed from one side to the other, and this technique is used especially to move krill into an efficient gulp. And it's really amazing that such a large animal eats this tiny, tiny food. But krill are an important source for the humpback whales, who spend 90% of their waking hours feeding. So I got really excited when I saw this pink patch, thinking, oh, look, the whale has organized its food. And then someone told me, well, Sherry, that's whale poop. So pink from eating pink food. And whales will often poop just as they dive. So with their complex diet of fish and krill, humpbacks produce a lot of poop. And it turns out that they eat more than what we thought. And they eat more different things than what we thought. So some recent studies in the Salish Sea have noted that they eat a lot of pollock, not just herring. And of course, these would be juvenile fish, as humpbacks have very small throats. And all of this means they recycle more nutrients, i.e. poop, than we thought. And of course, by analyzing poop, we can get whale DNA and learn about what they're eating. And there are even poop sniffing dogs in the Salish Sea that find killer whale poop for collection. And whale poop is an essential source of nutrients for marine ecosystems. In particular, iron is made available to ocean creatures such as phytoplankton, which are in turn food for krill. So we kind of think of whales as mobile krill processing plants or fertilizer machines. They inject iron back into the environment, which otherwise would just sink to the ocean floor as the krill died. Now, of course, I was super excited to see this poop in chunks. So, of course, I launched a kayak to go check it out. Now, prior to the time that whales were hunted, there was considerably more krill in the ocean than there is now. This may seem like a paradox, but it turns out that more whales and more whale poop means more phytoplankton and thus more krill. Now, because phytoplankton absorb carbon and produce oxygen, this means having more whales is also good for the global environment. Now, these are the connections I love. Whale poop is good for us. Now, if whales are in an area with small schooling fish, they might hit the water with their fins or flukes to stun or herd their prey. And we'll also look at some other techniques for catching fish. Sometimes a whale will blow a net of bubbles and then catch the prey before, or sorry, they'll blow a net of bubbles and then they'll lunge through it. In this case, a single whale has produced a bubble net. So here are some bubbles coming to the surface. Susanna, these are the bubbles you saw. This whale was using a rock as one side of its net, so it didn't have to blow a whole circle, just a curtain across the front. And here's a pair of humpbacks working together, and it's not uncommon to see 3 or 4 whales working together. So fish inside a bubble net don't pass through the fizzing curtain of bubbles, and the whales come up with their mouths wide open through the center. So these 2 whales made their net so close to our boat that I looked straight down and saw bubbles, and I was just hoping we weren't inside the net, and they surfaced right beside us. So look in this video to see the bubbles rising to the surface. In some cases, larger groups of whales feed together. So one blows a bubble net and a dozen or so whales will come up through it. The first time I saw this was in Alaska back in the 90s. 2 whales breached simultaneously and others began to gather into a group. And this really seemed to be breaching for communication. It was like a call to order. We put down our hydrophone and listened to the feeding calls. It was very much like what is in this next video from the Great Bear. So my friend Tavish Campbell kindly gave me this to use, and it doesn't work for me to speak while the video is running. So I'll just mention now that you'll see some little animals swim in on the top right, and those are Dall's porpoises. So it is one of the most exciting experiences to see that large number of mouths erupt from the water, especially when you can listen to them. Excuse me. So this coordinated feeding involves a ringleader who goes down first, a caller, and herders. And basically, the ringleader blows the bubble net, the herders corral the fish, and the caller blasts the sound underneath the fish, causing them to rise up to the surface, followed by all the whales. And it can be a challenge to figure out where they're going to surface when you can't see the bubbles. But sometimes there are birds that see the little fish jumping out and they can give you an idea of where to look. So Fred Sharp, who studied this behavior in Alaska, likened it to a social club where there was a specific membership and each whale had its place in the circle. To the side might be some wannabes who are not members of the club. And when whale research first started in the Great Bear Sea area, this behavior wasn't significant, but soon individuals began to do this, and now there are at least 2 large groups working together. And in BC, we are learning that humpback relationships can be long lasting, with associations known of at least 12 or more years documented so far. In this North Coast area, bubble net feeding is now considered to be a common method of feeding, and that's different from some other areas. So, how is this knowledge transmitted? Do the mothers teach their calves? Do a group of whales just decide to join up? Did they learn this because they first spent some time in Alaska? There's still so much that we don't know. But there appears to be much more to humpback social life than we first, or social relations, than we first thought. So this graph documents the rise of bubble net feeding in the Great Bear Sea area. Now, the increase in numbers could be partly due to more time on the water observing, but it's likely a real increase due to this behavior being learned. Now, at the northern end of Vancouver Island is a very different style of feeding, and it's been given the name trap feeding. So, 2 whales were observed for the first time using this technique in 2011. So, a humpback sets a trap for juvenile herring when they're in small, diffuse schools. The fish collect in or near the mouth to escape predation by diving birds such as common murres and rhinoceros auklets. Little do they know. So the whales will spin and or use their pectoral fins to herd the fish into their mouths. And this feeding strategy doesn't take much energy. So typically they use the more energetic lunge feeding when the prey is in greater concentrations. Sometimes 2 whales will feed together and sort of herd the fish towards each other. And there are at least 26 whales now who trap feed, maybe more now, showing us again the transmission of new knowledge among whales. Now, I've just recently learned that trap feeding also takes place in the Gulf of Thailand, where polluted waters keep the prey very near the surface. So is this learned independently? It just all makes you wonder. Now, this makes for really great whale watching as the whales just stay on the surface. But this has also made it hard for researchers to identify them as they rarely see tails or dorsal fins. So in this area, they've actually made a whale mouth catalog. So, listening to humpbacks. I find often in nature that my most memorable experiences have come through my ears, and that is certainly the case with humpback whales. So, various research groups have teamed up to have a hydrophone network going up the whole coast. So, hydrophone is an underwater microphone, and it's an important method for studying killer whales, as each family group uses an identifiable dialect. We've already heard the humpback feeding calls, and we'll soon listen to some songs. As well, other sounds such as boat noise can be monitored, and it's possible to listen from home to some of these hydrophones. So these are the hydrophones in the Great Bear Rainforest. The Squally Channel hydrophones, the 4 green ones right here, are part of the SWAG project, Ships, Whales, and Acoustics in Gitgat territory. And the goal is to reduce the impacts of shipping traffic on whales. Now, this array of 4 hydrophones can actually pinpoint the exact location of whales who are producing sound by calculating how long it takes the sound to travel from each of the hydrophones to the receiver. And this project seeks to understand how noise levels interfere with communication, feeding, and just the lives of the whales in the area. It also provides a unique educational opportunity for the Gitgat to combine contemporary science with traditional knowledge to monitor and manage their traditional territory from the impacts of marine traffic. Now, for example, there have been 2 recent whale strikes by BC Ferry's Northern Expedition, and more LNG tankers are expected. So I mentioned that humpbacks sing. Humpback whale song has been described as the most complex of any species. It also remains a great mystery. For more than 40 years, researchers have been following this underwater song that shifts and reshapes each season. It can range from anywhere from 10 to 30 minutes long, and it's performed solely by males. So we used to think that humpback whales only sang on the breeding grounds, but we know by listening to hydrophones that they sing on our coast. So because their song changes each year, and all the whales of an area learn the same song, it is thought that perhaps this is where they compose. So, who decides how the song will change? How is it transmitted? So, let's take a listen. This is the song from 2008, and I find it quite orchestral in nature. So, how do they sing? Baleen whales don't have a phonic lip structure like some of the other whales. They do have a larynx that appears to play a role in sound production, but it lacks vocal cords. And scientists remain uncertain as to the exact mechanism. The process is different from humans because they don't exhale to produce sound. They likely recycle air in their body, and perhaps their cranial sinuses may also be used to create sound, but we don't really know how. So now that was 2008. Now we're going to listen to 2010, so 2 years later, and the song is very different. This one kind of makes me think of pop music. So I also mentioned listening to whales from home. So the next recording is from my computer from the hydrophone at Orca Lab. So we'll hear just a little bit of the 2021 song. So it was pretty neat just to be at home knowing you're listening to a whale in real time. The singing starts a bit before migration time, which varies from whale to whale. Most head off to their breeding grounds in Hawaii, and a significant number go down to Mexico, with a few heading towards Japan. Once they leave our coast, they basically stop eating, and it takes them about 4 to 8 weeks each way for their migration. And the females can be nursing a calf on their return, so no wonder they spend so much time building up their blubber supply in our waters. So now I want to talk a little bit about one of the ways we've learned about humpback whales and their movements. So the underside of each tail fluke is unique, meaning it's like a fingerprint for that whale. By identifying whales as individuals, we can study them, track them, just learn more about them. So this is a page from my personal catalog of about 150 whales. I've identified more than 200, so some are duplicates. And these don't include any I used to submit prior to having GPS in my camera. So Yoda is a whale that I photographed in different places over different years. She was the first whale that I matched to a previous image that I had. So I really couldn't believe it when I found her a third time. And then more recently, we were heading to go bear watching and heard that the stream was washed out. So we turned around, and as we did so, I snapped off 4 IDs, and I didn't even realize until I looked on my computer that I'd seen Yoda again. So it turns out that Yoda gets around, and here's where we're going to get into some of the citizen science. This is from a site called Happy Whale, where you can submit your sightings and get the ID for the whale. So Yoda's been spotted in Alaska, BC, and Hawaii, and she's been seen with a calf. So I'm going to go through a few whales going from the most white to the most black. This is a really beautiful one, it has two nicknames given by different researchers. So we don't yet know where this whale goes for the winter, but it certainly spends some time in the Great Bear Rainforest. Winter has more black in the middle, and back in the old days, we used to shoot high-speed black and white film, and then we had to write down the GPS and then sort through pages of whale photos to try and make a match. Now cameras record the GPS, and there's an AI or artificial intelligence program that will do most of the work to identify the whale. So winter is well documented in both Hawaii and the BC coast. Now, what a great pattern on this tail. It doesn't yet have a nickname, but if I was going to give it one, I'd call it Fiesta, and I'll tell you why in a minute. But you can sponsor whale and give it a name. So this one goes to Mexico, and I just think it looks like it's having a fiesta party, that spotted tail. So Jupiter's a whale I've seen several times because it's a member of one of the bubble net groups. And Jupiter's well documented over several seasons going to Hawaii. But you can see Jupiter's been to Alaska. So I wonder if that's where it learned how to bubble net. And now we're looking at mostly black tails, but they're still identifying features. This one's pretty exciting for me because so far it's considered new to science, and I have the only record for it, which is in Haida Gwaii. It has been given an identity code, and that's the one location. So now I have a few whales considered new to science, and so far none of them have had another sighting recorded. I'm hoping. So on Happy Whale, you can choose to follow a whale and will receive a notification if it's sighted by someone else. So I'm always happy to get a Happy Whale notification, as it means we have another small piece in the puzzle. So Sula is another mostly black whale, and Sula has been reported in both Mexico and Hawaii. So Sula is known to be a male. So what convinced him to go to a location he wasn't born in? How did he find his way? Did he travel with companions? And where did he travel from Mexico? Here's another mostly black tail, but it's got a distinctive look on the one side there. This one goes to Hawaii, but seems to explore different parts of our coast, whereas many whales go back to the same place year after year. Now this one's out of the color sequence and is not one of my sightings, but I added it as a friend saw this one just last month. On Happy Whale, you can follow both whales or people. My friend saw this whale, which has also been to both Hawaii and Mexico. But in this case, we have different information. So the whale left Hawaii, or sorry, left Mexico to go to Hawaii, not back north. So was it a Hawaiian whale that just took a brief Mexican vacation? The information we don't yet have is its route to Mexico. So are these whales making a triangle? Still lots to learn. So this is my personal page on Happy Whale, showing the whales that I've submitted. There's some more in Iceland. And these are only the whales for which I was able to get a photo of the underside of the tail and have a GPS location. So as you can imagine, I've seen many more whales. Zooming in a little bit, and notice Kitimat right at the top, which is where the terminal will be for the LNG tankers that will be going in and out. And they will pass right through all these whale waters. Zooming in some more, I also post all my sightings on iNaturalist because I want the public to be able to see where whales are, particularly in areas where they could be threatened by something like tanker traffic. And I might also mention that this is the area where fin whales have returned, and they have the highest numbers of being struck by ships. So this is an important role that citizen scientists can play to document what is in threatened places, whether it's marine or terrestrial environments. Participating in citizen science gives you connections to the natural world, and I get excited to find out that one of the whales I'm following has made it to Hawaii or Mexico, or that they've made it back to their feeding grounds, or that someone I know has seen the same whale. And here in BC, we have the Canadian Pacific Humpback Cooperative. In the old days, DFO, the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, maintained a whale catalog, and then they stopped doing that. So then each of the research groups was doing their own individual catalog. So now they've got together and are working together to have a central location where sightings can be submitted. And this information goes directly to the researchers. So humpback whales are amazing, intelligent creatures. We've treated them wrongly for many years, but we have a chance to do better by them now. It's beyond magical to be in their presence. And I hope we can continue to learn more about them and increase our understanding of the amazing world we live in, as well as make it a safer place for them. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share now.
Thank you, Sherry. That was just incredible. And I would love to open it up to questions, comments. I see you're welcome to put it in the chat and I can read it out, or Sherry can read it, or you can raise your hand and unmute. Yeah, Tom.
Awesome presentation. Thank you very much. You mentioned that the numbers of humpbacks are getting close to historical numbers. You know how they determined what the historical population was of the humpback?
Yeah,
How was that done?
Actually, Tom, I don't know that.
Okay.
You know, most of what I present is my own observations, and occasionally I pull stuff out of books. So they're just numbers I pulled out of some information I read, but I don't know the
Okay.
background. Yeah. And hello again. It was nice to see you a couple of weeks ago.
Can I have one more short one?
Yes.
It may sound a little funny, but some ichthyologists have reported how herring make noises out of their back end. And given the digestive tract of a humpback, do they make noises? Do they fart? I mean, I know it sounds odd, but they must be processing so much. Wouldn't that be a possible source of some of the
I don't know the answer. I have never experienced a whale farting. I've seen them poop lots.
So the hydrophones have never picked anything up during those times, eh?
Well, you know, it'd be a good question to ask the people who are really listening to those in the stations. If I get back up there, I'll definitely ask that question.
Okay, thank you.
And I mean, I don't know if there are any whale scientists on this presentation today. I am not a whale scientist.
Yeah,
I am just a naturalist. So if anyone does know the answers to these questions, please do chime in.
great. Thank you.
I'll start reading a couple of questions from the chat. Vicky was asking, what makes the white on the tail?
It's just the pigmentation pattern. I'm guessing it's a genetic thing. You know, it's part of how the tail is pigmented. The scars and things can change over time. So the the look of a whale's tail can change over time, but it'll start with a certain amount of pigmentation.
And then like for Fiesta, is it just like the old barnacle, the circles,
Um,
barnacles
Usually
where
the
they go up?
barnacle scars are white, so I think she just has some really good, or I'm not sure of the gender of that whale. That whale has some really good spots.
That's cool. I was thinking it was some sort of fungus, but that's your answer I like a lot better.
Good.
Lots of accolades in the chat about what an amazing presentation, and thank you. Here's a question. Can you recommend any tours for the public in the Great Bear Rainforest area for whale watching?
Yeah, I mean, I can recommend the companies that I've worked for. So that those are Maple Leaf Adventures and Blue Water Adventures, as well. And they're both really excellent tours, usually about a week long. The other ones that I can think of off the top of my head are um, uh, Mothership Adventures, which is mothership kayaking, and Outer Shores Expeditions, and the Great Bear 2, and company that run it was they used to have the Ocean Light 2, but it burned up. They have another boat. I can't think of the name of their company. There's not that many of them, but pretty much any of them are good operators.
I'm going to write them in the chat. So you said Maple Leaf Adventures, Blue Water.
Yeah. Outer Shores, Mothership, Great Bear 2. That's a Roman numeral 2. And I'm just sorry the other company's name is escaping me, and they don't have the Ocean Light 2 anymore because it burned down. Yeah, anyway, any of those would be good.
Any other questions? Anyone want to unmute or chat?
I have another one.
Go ahead,
Go
Tom.
for
We were
Um,
born in the same small town in Alberta, by the way, Tom and I.
Funny.
The Queen of the North sitting in 400 meters of water off of, I think, Gill Island. And when I was up there, there was some concern about the slow leak of diesel from the tanks. Is that still an issue that's happening?
I think, with all of those vessels on board, or sorry, all those vehicles on board, absolutely. I mean, those things are going to rust out and the fuels are going to get out. It's just, to me, I just can't believe that they didn't make some kind of effort to raise it. And it's 400 feet of water, so it's down pretty deep. But especially, given the heroic effort of the local people to save the lives of, all but 2 of the passengers, and then to, just leave this leaking thing in their environment. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was a little concerned because the spirit bear actually forages regularly on the intertidal, and Marvin from one of the villages was saying that he could occasionally see the sheen, that oil sheen, on real calm days, and you just wonder about sort of the cascading effects
Yeah.
of
No,
this being this low level, not an oil spill, it's just this low residual.
persistent.
Okay, anyway, yeah, thanks. Serious problem for sure.
I think it's horrendous myself, but
Yeah.
I have a question for you, Sherry. I've heard this, I can't remember where, that there have been some sightings of humpbacks throughout the year now in the Salish Sea area, and that some of them aren't migrating anymore. And I was just wondering
Well,
if that is something new, or maybe before
the-
whaling.
there are more whales. So, but what we do know is that humpback whales have been sighted every month on our coast. But we don't know for sure whether they're not migrating. It could be that they just haven't left at that time. So
Mm.
we don't have any documentation of a single whale that's been seen, every month. We have documentation of whales being seen every month, but whether they're coming and going and we're just seeing them at that time, that's still unclear.
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because would there be enough food to support them at all months?
Well, I
What's
mean,
the
they're not
krill and
they're not getting food when they go to Hawaii. So if there's
true. That's true. Yeah. Are sperm whales also recovering?
Yeah, I don't know that much about sperm whales. They they are seen, especially if you go off the continental shelf, just off of Haida Gwaii. People tend to see them there. So I don't know much about their population numbers. The only place I've ever seen them is in the Sea of Cortez. So we kind of think that blue whales have less of a chance of recovering than some of the others, just because they were so hard hit. That fingers crossed that they may be able to. And we saw the first Pacific northern right whales were seen recently in the last few years. They hadn't been seen for 50 or 60 years, and so sometimes these things are out there. We just don't see them very often.
There's another question in the chat. The future LNG tanker traffic is quite worrisome. Do you know of any collaboration between the researchers and citizen scientists and the LNG business community or promoters?
I don't know the specifics of it, but down here there are whale reporting apps, and people report where they're seeing whales, and that goes to the captains of the big ships, so that they can hopefully slow down and avoid whales. I'm sure there will be some kind of an arrangement like that take place once the traffic's really going, because there is so much science going on in that area and so much documentation of what's there that they won't have any choice but to do their best to keep their press on the good side.
Another question is, the recordings of their vocalizations sound harmonic to humans. What do they sound like to whales? Do they
Well,
hear the same range as we do?
well, it's going to be completely different. So I have a little thing that I like to do. It's called oven racking, and it came out of my party days of my youth. But basically, you tie some strings to an oven rack, and you wind the strings around your fingers, and you plug the strings onto the top of your jawbone. Now, whales take in sound. They don't have eardrums the way we do. They take the sound in through their jaws. So if you listen, if you hit the oven rack with some spoons or things, and you listen to it through the air, and then you plug it into your ears and listen to it through your jawbones, it's radically different. So I'm guessing from that fun little experiment that whales hear that quite differently.
Mm. We've got some more questions here. How do we know that they are not eating on the migration?
I guess some of the scientists have determined that in some fashion. I don't know. Once they leave this coast, I don't really know much about them.
I've got another question, just thinking about breaching behaviors and tail slapping and that kind of thing. Do you think they could just be itchy? Like, do they rub their bodies on rocks like some orcas do? And
I don't think I've ever heard of any actual rubbing, but I mean, hey, who knows? they'll sometimes come, occasionally a friendly whale will come right up and, rub along the side of a boat. So, why are they doing that? Maybe they're itchy. I don't know.
um, somebody put in a link here. Melissa, thank you for this link to a new New Yorker article on sperm whale communication. Looks good. From yesterday.
Oh, wow. Current news.
Yeah, so you can click on that and read that after the presentation. And a question from Lori, how long do calves stay with their mother?
So they're born in the breeding grounds and they'll come over to the coast, and then they'll go back with mom, and they may or may not come back to the coast again with mom, but after that they're done that relationship. I mean, they may, we're still learning something about the social lives of whales, but it doesn't appear that the calves stay with the mom significantly after that.
Any other questions, or I'm sure we could keep Sherry busy all night with our questions. You touched on so many different topics and just incredible recordings, and your photography is amazing as well. Yeah, really impressive. I think we all want a little piece of your life there, your job. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for coming, and a big round of applause for Sherry. Thank you for sharing so much of your knowledge and your incredible presentation with us tonight.
Thanks very much.
And good night, everybody, and hope to see you again soon.
Good night. Thank you.